First of all, welcome to the AWS Summit. I know we're on the back end of the day, so thank you so much for hanging in there with us. And second, thank you for spending time with Atos and Johnson & Johnson today to learn a little bit more about Amazon Connect. Maybe just kind of level set, from an audience perspective, hands up, heard of Amazon Connect before? Somewhat? Okay. Well, maybe just a quick backdrop, and then I'll turn it over certainly to the more compelling speakers. Amazon Connect is part of the AWS ecosystem of services. It's actually our contact center as a service, and it's been generally available and in market since March of 2017. But that said, the story behind Amazon Connect is such that about 12 years ago, Amazon Retail was actually going through a transition in their business practices, and they were looking at ways to kind of up-level the way they were looking after their customers. And one of that was, how do they actually provide contact center capabilities that were predictive and proactive and very user-friendly and would allow for great expediency and resolution. And like many organizations, they did RFIs and RFPs and POCs and all the other things, and decided quickly that there really wasn't anything out there that met their needs. And so there was a small, extremely angry band of developers that actually set out to building a contact center. And they built that service on the AWS ecosystem, which was just kind of launching at the time. So it was built on EC2, and they used S3 for storage, et cetera, and ultimately launched it. And for the past 11 years, we have been using this service to run our global contact centers. And to give you an idea, we have approximately 130 contact centers globally, 24 countries, 36 languages. And during our peak, we'll have over 70,000 agents on the phone looking after our customers globally. And what we had discovered was during that ideation phase and exploration phase, many of our customers were kind of experiencing many of the challenges we were in terms of scale and reliability and cost, et cetera. And so we elected to speak with a bunch of customers, and they helped us actually commercialize it. So that's why we're here. But more importantly, why we're here today, we actually have Tara O'Brien, who's the Director of End User Computing and Services at Johnson & Johnson, and also Mike McGarry, an account CTO from Atos, one of our valued global partners. And they're going to be talking a little bit about their Amazon Connect journey and sharing some key learnings with you. And that's going to be probably significantly more compelling than anything I'm going to say. So with that said, I'm going to turn it over to Ms. Tara. Tara?
Thank you so much.
Thanks.
So how many of you enjoy navigating phone trees? Whoa, actually a few people like navigating phone trees. All right. How many of you either own, from a business perspective or a technical perspective, a contact center phone tree in your place of work? Okay, much better. All right. So I didn't really think too many people would actually raise their hand for navigating phone trees. But since you guys seem to like it, we'll talk to the rest of the crowd. Hopefully that once you finish this presentation and you see the power of bringing Connect into the environment, you'll feel a little bit better about having a phone tree yourself and not feel like you're driving your end users or your callers or customers crazy on that tree. So a little bit about Johnson & Johnson, if you don't know us. We are the largest and most diversified healthcare company in our world. We blend heart, science, and ingenuity to profoundly change the trajectory of health for humanity. We have over 35,000 employees who serve 1 billion patients every single day. And you probably are more familiar with our Band-Aid and baby products, but that's in our consumer line. We also have a number of products that save lives every day in our pharmaceuticals sector, as well as changing things like hips and bad knees in our medical devices area. So we are touching lives all over the place, from start when you're a baby to aging when you have some other chronic issues you might be dealing with. Mike?
Hey everybody, my name is Mike McGarry. I'm the account CTO on the Johnson & Johnson account, and I have a really cool job. My role is to run a small team that focuses 100% on innovation. And for the last year and a half, we've been focusing on a couple things, but primarily Amazon Connect, because there's really powerful ways of doing that. So for those who are not familiar with what Atos is a managed service company, about 120,000 users strong. We are one of the leaders from market analysis on digital workplace. Presence in over 70 countries. We have a lot of patents. There's some stats up there. From a workplace practice perspective, we have a whole bunch of things, but for today's conversation, we're going to focus on sort of the Help Interaction Center and really around digital experience consulting.
All right, So let's talk a little bit about the J&J landscape and the environment we work in. Because if we can do it in our space, I guarantee that all of you can do this in your space. So we do support over 220 colleagues. That's both employees and non-employees. We are supporting 12 languages, so no small feat there, in 81 countries and across 6 continents. With our managed service partner, we have approximately 1,000 techs that are either on the phones or out in the field doing actual L2 desk side support. For context around our number of contacts, we actually do about 1.3 million per year. With, as of last year, we actually surpassed with about 670,000 in chat and about 560,000 in voice. So voice not too far behind, but it was kind of neat to see when chat kind of took over the voice channel. 120,000 of those chats are actually machine translated. So we put technology in about 2 years ago where we cut some of our languages to maintain some cost, and we're using a machine translation service, which is pretty cool and neat in a call center perspective. And 68% of our tickets, our incident tickets, are resolved at first contact resolution. Industry standard is about 65 if you go to the Help Desk Institute, so we're right in that space for our first contact resolution. What isn't resolved at first contact moves over to our on-site tech support, and they do about 286,000 tickets, and they're delivering also and swapping out from our PC lifecycle management, in addition to their tickets, about 30,000 PCs annually. So we do a third of our PCs regularly, and they're touching about 180,000 devices within the environment, right? So lots of people have a PC, a mobile phone, a tablet, et cetera. We also have something which is pretty neat that we've done with our managed service partner as well, which is our bright red tech bars. So very similar to walking into a store, making an appointment, and having your service provided for whatever your issue is on your phone or tablet. You can do the same at 40 of our larger sites, and that's in 12 countries, and they're actually cranking out about 57,000 tickets per year. So that's a little bit about our background. It's not small. It's not as large as Amazon, as Scott mentioned, but it's certainly in that space where there's a lot of complexity, a lot of scalability, and a lot of challenges in trying to get something changed in the environment. So we've focused on a couple of principles in our world in the end user services space over the last year or so, and I'm going to talk a little bit about the first two, but we're going to spend much more time on the last one. So drive with digital experience. We've really focused on looking at our data, whether it's our call center data, our chat data, our PC usage data, whatever it is. There's really a lot of data out there that we can use and leverage in the IT space. Looking at that to drive decisions, picking out our roadmap, what are we going to do next, what are we going to put in our backlog, and really then what is the end user experience going to be with that? Are we just going to tell them, here, we rolled this out to you, and not tell them how to use it? Or are we going to make it simple, like when you get a new app upgrade on your phone and it just works, right? Where are we going with that? And that's where we start to apply continuous innovation. We're using that data to say, what do we need to improve on? Oh, we had a lot of people call because something was missing from their Outlook toolbar. How do we fix that? Well, let's push the fix to everyone silently. They don't ever even have to call the desk or contact the desk. We fix it for them. We drive that for enhancements, and certainly as well as when our new services are rolling out, we start to really look at what did we learn from some of the data and innovation we did in old services space that we can now leverage for our new services. And delight the end users. So this is really where we have focused over the past 9 to 12 months. How do we take the first two, leveraging that data and the innovation to drive a positive interaction and customer satisfaction? And so we really started to think about our service recovery program. Pete Blackshaw wrote this book about 11 years ago, and it always stuck with me. Satisfied customers tell 3 friends, angry customers tell 3,000. Well, 11 years ago, I don't think Mr. Blackshaw knew that with the advent of social media, you actually could potentially reach 2.7 billion other people. Right? And so when you start to think about that and you say, I had a negative experience and now I'm going to post it somewhere, and now their friends and my friends and their friends' friends all know about it, that goes bad pretty quickly. And so as we started this service recovery program, we started to think, how do we change when we mess up? We have a dissatisfied customer. What will we do? You know, there's 2 words that work really well in this space, and they still work today, and that's, I'm sorry. or we're sorry. When you look at the Carey School of Business, they actually found out in the retail space, when you gave compensation, so your order was wrong or something was delivered late, when they gave compensation, 10% off your next order, or whatever that compensation may be, people felt satisfied about 37% of the time. But when you gave that compensation with an apology, 2 words, I'm sorry, it doubled to about 74% satisfied. So people have turned those DSATs, as we call them, into CSATs, into satisfactions. And our internal users don't get to choose us, right? They can't say, oh, I work at Johnson & Johnson. I'm going to call a different service desk today because I didn't like the answer that our service desk gave us yesterday. It doesn't quite work like that for us. And we can't compensate them. I can't give everyone a $5 gift card every time we have a DSAT. That would break the bank pretty quickly. But we can apologize. And after we apologize, we can shift to eliminating the root cause and really starting to think about how do we enhance this experience? How do we delight our customers? Why should we delight them? Why? Why? They're our internal users. They're stuck with us. Well, because being at work is no longer about the task and accomplishments you do. Being at work is about the experience at work, both through the culture, the technology, and the physical workspace. So SHRM is the Society of Human Resource Management, and they've done some studies of companies that work on focus on experiences. And they're seeing that they outperform their peers by 400% in profits, 40% lower attrition, and their stock prices outperform the market at a rate that's much, much higher than any of the others. This is becoming the focus of corporate. This is becoming where it's not just about I come and I do my job and I get my task done and I get a reward or I don't get a reward and I move on to the next role, right? We are focused on how we delight our customers. How do we do that? Technology is a huge portion. How many of you have new hires who start in your organization and they have their accounts and their laptops and everything else they need in the first hour? See 1, 2, I think that's about it, maybe 3 or 4. And how many of you have organizations where the new hire shows up and maybe it's day 2, day 3, they have their laptop, day 4, oh, I see, keep going, should we do an auction? All right, so that's where it's becoming about experiences. Technology is in everything they do, whether it's logging into Office 365, calling the contact center, chatting with the contact center, running their applications. It's all there. It's part of their work experience now. So moving to Amazon Connect has given us a lever to delight our customers. And you're saying, Tara, how could that be? It's just a phone tree. It's just a phone system. But we will tell you over the next few minutes. So our existing telephony system, we actually had to build as 78 different IVR structures. Anyone that manages IVRs is already shaking their head. And it took us 3 to 4 months for changes to be executed with a considerably high cost. Why? Because at the time, we had our IVR translated into 34 languages. And if I even wanted to just make a slight wording change, let's say I wanted to change from the global service desk to the IT help desk, I needed to pay for actors to go in a studio. I needed to pay for studio time. I needed to get all of that back. Oh, the Swedish lady is on vacation. You can't have that back for 2 more weeks. So you can see where that starts to build time and cost into it. And then I have to send it to our J&J team members to listen and say, that's perfect, or, oh, those 3 words really just didn't sound right. Can you re-record it? Right? So we're adding up money and just kind of wasting it on just simple changes. It's inflexible and it's service defined. We built it based on what we needed in the IT space. What do we want to report on? Let's build our tree that way. What do we want our end users to hear first? Let's build our tree that way. So it was a limited reaction to data analysis. It was little to no enhancements because for the most part, we said, no, we're not going to make that change. Nope, we're going to live with it until the next big release, and then we'll bundle a bunch of changes together. And we didn't have any measurement of the voice experience. As we brought chat on, we started to realize that getting satisfaction and a response from an end user at the point of contact, so they just had a chat experience, let me ask them during the chat experience, how was that? How was the agent? How was the service? Was your issue resolved? We had no way to do that on voice contacts. And what was happening is tickets that were passed to maybe 2 or 3 groups, the person that was the last person who probably was the hero and resolved it, but the end user remembered the bad 2 other people they talked to that didn't resolve their issue. So how did the ticket get scored? It wasn't a good indication of how the agent actually behaved with them. So moving to Connect, we now have one IVR structure. Yay. It takes minutes, I assure you, minutes for changes. We had, when we were going live one day with our Portuguese team, we had an issue where he's like, I just don't like the way that Portuguese sounds. We dropped it in, we had the SSML, he listened to it, he said that's perfect. We had it in production in probably less than 3 minutes. You cannot beat that. And you can imagine that the cost, first of all, I eliminated all those actors and voice studio time. So right there, the cost is tremendously decreased. And it's flexible, and it will be end user defined, right? I don't need to ask them a tree anymore. They can voice tell me what they're calling about. I need my password reset. I need access to Office 365. And we can get them to the right place in our service desk environment. We can now have more data, and we can react quickly, which is the key part we couldn't do before. We have an endless roadmap of continuous enhancements that we're already working on and more to come as 2020 approaches. And to that survey point, we can survey specifically to the voice experience. That point in time, how was your service?
So now I get to explain how we made it all happen, right? So as Tara explained, we're looking to delight our end users. We're looking for better employee engagement. But how do we get there, right? So we started with a sandbox, and quite literally, from the moment we made the decision, you know, I whipped up my corporate card, signed up for an Amazon account, and literally had it working in 20 minutes. Now, it was basic, but I had an 800 number, and I could take a call. So we started with the sandbox, we played around with it. We needed to understand, at that point, Amazon was still less than a year old. Or Amazon Connect was less than a year old, and we had to understand exactly what its capabilities were, so we started with the sandbox. But then we started building our first minimal viable product, right? Built a proof of concept, we tested it out, we tested a few things, went back to the drawing board, came back with some enhancements, and as we did this, we kind of matured our initial pilot. And our initial pilot was Portuguese. So we looked at all the languages we had, and we didn't want the big one, English, we didn't want the small one, French Canadian, we wanted something nice and easy in the middle. So we picked Portuguese, and it's out of Portugal and Brazil. So we went live with that, and we actually really tested this out. And as Tara mentioned, when we went live, we had some changes, and we'll talk about some lessons learned later in the presentation. But this was our first chance to try it out. We were looking at the logs, we were looking at the calls, we followed up with users, but it went really well. And so we rolled it out, but we didn't just do it all at once. We started with Portuguese, we added Spanish and French Canadian, rounding out one of our facilities. Then we added our European languages. Then we added English, which was a huge portion of our language volume. And then we added our Asian languages. And we did the last rollouts within 6 weeks. So we had a pilot phase. We did the Portuguese, we did Spanish, French Canadian, we ran that. We had a period of time where we had to kind of put up just a quick pause at the end of the year, but then as soon as that came out, we finished everything out in 6 weeks. So phase 1 was a lift and shift, except it wasn't a lift and shift, right? So we didn't want to just take the things we dealt with in the past and move it to the future. So we transformed a little bit. But this is where I think you can start to see the power of using the Amazon ecosystem when you talk about Amazon Connect. So quite literally, we have Connect actually receive the call, but the call flows, which by the way, at a default level, are drag and drop. But they allow you to invoke other things like Amazon AWS Lambda. And so we use AWS Lambda to pull a DynamoDB database which has all of the behavior, all of the prompts, everything we have about the behavior of the IVR is stored in a database. So every time a call comes in, every single time, we inspect where it came from, what number they called, and we look up, is it open? Where do I send the calls? What do I say? What's the next thing I do? And it all comes dynamically from a database. And then we take all of the information, all the agent information, all the call information, and we use Kinesis, and we push that into Redshift, right? So we needed a way of reporting. So we used Redshift. It made perfect sense to kind of stay within the ecosystem. And then lastly, all the call recordings go into S3. So this is where we receive the value of going from months to minutes for changes. This is where we were able to quickly do call retrievals for QA in minutes instead of days. And we were able to move from 78 IVRs down to 1. So then phase 2, this is where we really started to leverage the ecosystem, right? So we had the basics, right? We had the same things we had in the last slide, but then we added Amazon Lex. We have new ways of doing reporting, right? We wanted more out of our dashboarding technology, so we use Kinesis to feed into Elasticsearch with Kibana on top of it. And now what I'm really excited about is the analysis pipeline. So traditionally, when you're doing QA on calls, you have a few QA folks, they have a process where they go through, randomly select certain calls, they listen to them, they score them, they meet with the the agent, and they say, hey, listen, this is what you did right, this is what you did wrong, which is fine. And that won't change in and of itself. But now, every call goes through, gets put into S3, initiates a pipeline that goes through Amazon Transcribe and Amazon Comprehend. So the transcription comes through and we separate the caller, the agent, and a combined transcription, JSON files. We send that through Comprehend and do 2 different analyses. There's a built-in sentiment analysis and a built-in keywords. So in near real time, I can tell the sentiment of every call that comes through Amazon Connect. And with Elasticsearch and Kibana, I can create visualizations and dashboards like I had never had the capability to before. I can create leaderboards about how well our agents served the customers just half an hour ago, and kind of inspire that competitive spirit to do better. Our QA agents can look at specific calls that were either really good or not so good, and perform those real-time coaching loops and focus on things we need to focus on, because they're able to do the analysis at a macro level instead of a random level. So this kind of really allowed us to get out of our traditional IVR structure, our traditional contact center, and really move into a cloud-based contact center solution. So then we started just innovating. We're like, at this point, the sky was the limit. We had a million ideas. We created a huge pipeline. We started looking at things. For example, what was the actual, we had the sentiment according to Comprehend what they thought about, but why don't we just ask them a question, right? Why don't we try to capture feedback after every call? And so this is pretty traditional on some consumer ones, but it's not so traditional necessarily in the IT space. So we created a new call flow that at the end of every call, there was a quick connect where you'd say, hey, listen, I'm going to transfer you to a quick survey, goes into a call flow, asks a few questions, collects the information, sends it into Redshift, sends it into Elasticsearch, and again, we can use that information in real time to understand what's going on in our environment. And again, we take advantage of all this. We can update the questions on the fly if we want to. We can scale from 1 to 5 to however many we want, currently 2. But again, this gives us a real ecosystem view of taking advantage of different aspects, using Lambda, using Dynamo, using Elasticsearch, and Kibana. And this one I'm really excited about. So we talked about the digital experiences and delight our end users. And who has been flying and has had interrupted? They've had an issue where their flight got canceled. They called the number and they had your number on file. They knew what happened and they anticipated your intent saying, let me help you get rebooked. That's common in the B2C world. It's not common in the internal space. So what we've been doing is, for the intent anticipation, is taking information that we already have at our fingertips, understanding, what's going on, like when did they start? Did they just have a blue screen on their computer? Did they have access to a specific application? And can we greet them as soon as they identify themselves with their employee number? Can we say, thank you, Tara, I see you just joined Johnson & Johnson, welcome aboard. Can I transfer to somebody that can help you get started today? Or, hey, John, I see you just had a blue screen on your computer. Can I transfer you to a team that focuses on fixing that issue? Because if you just had a blue screen and you're calling the desk, you're probably calling about that. We'll give them other options, but we're trying to anticipate the intent. Another really cool use case behind this is customized floodgates. I mean, if you have an application, if you have the hundreds and thousands of applications in your environment, unless it's a big one like 365 or your ERP system going down, you're probably not going to put a system-wide floodgate up there. What we can do now is understand the application access, stream it into our abstraction layer that we dip into, And then check ServiceNow. And if that CI has a P1, we can say, Mr. Customer, I see you have access to application ABC. It currently has an issue. If you'd like to be notified when it's back up, press 1 now. And we'll just create a child ticket or some other function to flag that user to be notified as soon as it's resolved. So very interesting, very digital experiences about end users. And this is kind of the core of what we're trying to do with delighting our end users. So from a continuous integration, we've set up a whole kind of plethora of things we want to do. For right now, for Lex, in the short term, we're just trying to do voice-based navigation. But where we see this growing is, can we start to answer questions? Can you ask complex questions, and can we have the right intents and utterances defined to answer the questions and deflect the call? And by all means, if the answer is lengthy or wordy, we don't want to just have them on there while we read to them for 4 minutes. We're looking for off-channel deflection. So for example, if I ask a question saying, how do I order a laptop? And the answer is a process with links, right? We can send it to them via Microsoft Teams or by email or a text to their phone with a deep link into the article. So we want to be able to answer those questions and just get them off the phone, because at the end of the day, the agent's it's pretty much going to do the same thing. We want contextually dependent hold messaging. So if I'm on hold for Spanish, as an example, and it's got a 3-minute wait or a 5-minute wait, but there's no wait on English, we can say in Spanish, listen, if you'd like to speak to someone in English, press 1 now, and we can direct them over there, or any other skills. Virtual hold. Again, we don't typically have long wait times, but for those times when we do have busy times during outages or whatever, we want to have a virtual hold capability. So if they're on the phone, we can say, hey, listen, it's going to be 5 more minutes, press 1, and we'll call you back when it's your turn in line. So that capability is native inside of Amazon Connect. We have a mobile app for internal support. We want to be able to request a callback at a specific time and date. Like if I know that I just need to talk to somebody and ask for a question, and I'm going to be in the car in 5 minutes, I'll just go into my app and schedule an outbound call for 5 minutes from now or 10 minutes from now, and they'll call me. This is an abbreviated version of our backlog, but the concept is we have a platform with a cloud-based contact center. We have infinite amount of data at our fingertips. What use cases can we apply? And so far, we really haven't found anything that we couldn't figure out how to do. So there were lessons learned, right? It's roses, but there's some things, right, that we learned along the way. So we were very gung-ho. We developed our proof of concept, our pilot environment, and we went live and said, oh crap, where are we going to develop now? So then we had to stop and go back and build a development environment. So in hindsight, it would have been nice if we had thought at the beginning to create 2 environments and actually created an SDLC process at the very get-go. So lesson learned by us. This is actually kind of important. Test the IVR in every destination country, not centrally. So there's a lot of things about call centers and contact center solutions that can be affected by distance. For example, DTMF prompts, press 1 for this, press for 2 for this, react different in different countries. So we did all of our testing in the US, we went live with Portugal, and there was just a couple seconds delay before the DTMF tones were processed by Connect, just because of speed of light. And we had to do some tweaking on the fly as we went live. We did it pretty quick, and within a couple minutes we fixed it. But again, something we could have avoided.
And I think that's important too, to continually test.
Absolutely.
Right? We found out in a previous project that there are some countries, if your toll-free number is not used quite regularly, they just disable it, and you don't know it. So we don't have a huge user population somewhere. We might not get a lot of volume from it, and if we weren't looking at the data, which we probably weren't at that time, oh, we haven't gotten any calls from country X. Well, why not? Well, it's actually because the phone number was turned off. So it's important to continuously test, and we actually now have something with the Connect that we can continually test and make sure that it's always running. It's checking the quality as well as that it's still up and running.
Yeah, the synthetic user testing basically makes a call, listens to a recording, compares it to the source, and makes sure it has a quality score that's acceptable, and make sure it's still up. Not all Amazon services, AWS services, support all languages. which really wasn't an issue, it's just a consideration, right? So we have a lot of languages. Lex is supported by a handful of languages, not all of our languages. Comprehend is supported by some of our languages, but not all of our languages. So we had to have a strategy in which we could provide these services to the countries in which we can support them, but still have as much as a comparable service everywhere else. So we have one IVR, but we have some logic tests in there that says if it's this language and we can process, then do this, right? So we have some slight variations that hopefully over time we can kind of just have full 100% adoption as those services expand. Look at Amazon country and language coverage and determine if you need an external toll-free number provider. So we talked before, we have 81 countries. AWS Connect has less than that, right? So we use an external TFN provider that we then have them point to an Amazon DID, and we have it in 3 different instances, so it's all regional based, but we were able to extend the capability even if there wasn't any native support. It's allowed us to cover our very large footprint. This is probably more so for us, and some of you might have a very security conscious security department. That's, I think, the right way of saying it. Sure. Go through the security approvals early. If you have to enable services, we talked about a whole plethora of them. And if you have an environment that is natively locked down instead of natively enabled, you might want to get that figured out very upfront. There was some delays for us that we had to go through.
And honestly, I think that added to more of our timelines than the actual work around Connect, right? Yeah. Because every time we wanted to turn on a service that wasn't turned on in our J&J environment, we actually had to do a security review. So that added to our timelines. So to Mike's point of 6 weeks or 6 months, we probably could have shortened that up. So from your perspective, if you're not in a controlled security environment, you could probably shorten your timelines by at least a quarter.
Understand what your real-time needs are. So we went live and we did some end-user surveying and we went live with some of the native dashboarding, but there was a lot of questions like, well, could we do this, could we do that? So that's where we made a decision. We were going to kind of go with Elasticsearch and Kibana for some of our dashboarding, because what we were doing was well outside the scope of Connect, but it was also, we were getting some requests of doing some very innovative things in reporting and dashboarding from our supervisors. So to meet that demand, we extended our capabilities. But having a clear line of sight of that at the very beginning would have probably shifted the way we did our development. And lastly, understand if you're going to do a pure lift and shift or a transformation. And I think it's, every company has a different situation. There's a lift and shift capability. If you did a lift and shift, there's certainly a ton of benefits. But sometimes it's best to use that opportunity when you're going to do a hard cutover, just cut it over to a new transformed environment. Right? So you have to make that decision for yourself. We did something of a hybrid.
And also because we did it across languages, so we started with Portuguese, we also had a pause after a couple of days, and we asked the end users and the agents, right? The agents are the one logging in every day and using it. How is it going for you? Do you have the same quality? Is it better? Are you having any issues? We actually had 1 or 2 agents who had something wrong. We also found a very simple fix to a few of the agents, but if we didn't stop and ask them, knowing agents, they probably would have just worked around it and maybe lived with it. So there was an issue with the laptop microphone where it was causing an interference. So once we figured that out, turn everyone's mics off, right? And then their headsets and into Connect were just fine. So make sure you take that pause, whatever your choice is, to ask your agents who are really your users of this on a daily basis, right, and a constant basis. Sure, your end users might need support or your consumers might need support or be using it. They're interacting with it, but they're not the ones actually working with it every day.
So let's give you some advice on how you can get started. Just start experimenting. It really, the barrier to entry, this is super low, right? You pay by the connected minute. So if you already have an Amazon environment, you can just get started and start playing around with it. And get comfortable with it. Take a little bit of time, build your workflows. If you're already proficient with Python or Node.js coding and you use Lambda, go with it. It's very easy to get started. So just start with that. And then determine your integrations early, right? So if you have to integrate with Salesforce, you have to integrate with ServiceNow, just figure that out up front because it's going to make some decisions on how you design your implementation. And also, figure out how your agents are going to sign in, right? There is one decision at the very beginning you have to make. If you're going to do SSO, you need to make the decision up front. Amazon Connect is agile friendly. We operate in an extremely agile way. Set up a board, create the cards, and work the board. It's as simple as that. You can create your own continuous development, continuous integration schedule and process, but it's very agile friendly. Understand your data sources. So ultimately, you have to collect some information up front, and you're going to stream it all the way into your data repository, whatever your data repository needs are. But make sure you figure out what you need for reporting on the back end, and you collect all that data up front. Understanding your reporting requirements in repository, we decided to go native and use Redshift if you have to stream externally. Again, Kinesis is great. You just have to figure out how you're going to connect it to it. So you have an existing data lake, data warehouse. Just figure out how you're going to connect the Kinesis that connected to your Connect instance or Connect instances back to your repository. And start small. Don't boil the ocean, right? Just start with one geography. If you can carve out languages, carve out centers, start small and then grow it from there. It'll give you an opportunity to take a break, take a pause, learn your lessons, roll it back in, and then expand from there. And then have a clear defined rollout strategy. We went one language, then all languages at one center, then another center, and then another 2 centers until we were rolled out. So we decided this methodology early on, and we based all of our development and our schedules based on that. And last but not least, set up a continuous integration and improvement. This is more around development, code development, than it is traditional IVR structure. So if you organize your skill sets of your teams, think about it from this perspective. It's not something you build once and forget about. It's something you build and continually improve over time. So I think that's the end of our presentation. We have plenty of time for questions. Any? Yep.
So this is really cool. Are you actively allowing agents real-time coaching from the exchange, or is it only post-transaction?
Interesting question. So right now, it's after the fact. There are some real-time APIs that are in beta mode that will allow for systematic real-time feedback of sentiment and keyword analysis. So there are some very interesting, very short-term enhancements that'll make it a real-time machine feedback loop, right? And on the same thing, on the same note, if we can get into Elasticsearch in real time, then we can have, some real-time insights into those, right? Our analysis pipeline takes anywhere between 5 and 20 minutes, depending on the length of the call. So it's near real time, not real time, but soon to be real time once those APIs become public.
Right, and if we start doing the leaderboards, right, then there's some healthy competition. I know I'm at the top or I'm not on it, so I know I'm not at the top, right? So there's just some of that own self-coaching that can come from the leaderboards, right? Oh, we put the top 5 up for this center today. Oh, at 9 o'clock I wasn't on it, but I worked really hard between 9 and 1, and at 1 o'clock I moved myself to number 2, and by 5 o'clock I moved myself to number 1, right? There's just that internal coaching and drive now happening because they want to aspire. So there's some self-coaching, if you will.
Any feedback on utterances that are out of grammar, if you will, that don't map to a particular intent?
Do you want to repeat the question?
Yeah, so the question was, and I'm sure I paraphrase you correctly, how do you do a feedback loop on utterances maybe that aren't grammatically correct and not matching for Lex?
Right. Users are saying things that are unexpected and you're not matching to an intent.
Yeah, so what we've decided to do and the approach we've decided to do is capture Lex as voice-based navigation for intent mapping. If it's routed incorrectly, we don't correct them. We capture what was said, what was determined by Lex, and where it was sent. And that is used for continuous feedback. So from a Lex perspective, you have to have a test set of your intents and utterances. Lex does a fairly good job at correcting for grammar within reason, but it's a continual process. And so one of the things that I would say is if you come up with an automated testing where if you have a new set of utterances that you want to load and new intents, that you have a control file and you can objectively test it so that your new set of intents and utterances improve your score based on your test file instead of detract from it.
And then the other thing we did when we were trying to build them is we did not look at voice tickets. We actually looked at chat transcript tickets and the self-service submission, right? Because that's in the end user's own words. So that dictionary glossary, if you will, to build those utterances and intents really came from what the end user was saying to us, right? Because how an agent types it in the description is different than what, they're paraphrasing at that point. But what the end user wrote in a chat window or wrote in the submission form themselves was a great place to get started.
Yeah, to get started, it was helpful to use that, and then ongoing, figure out what the actual matching of it was.
Hey, Mike, Tara, I'm so sorry, guys. I'll run the mic around so we can hear. Is that okay?
Thank you.
And I don't run well, so.
Just interested to hear if you guys are using the out-of-the-box contact control panel for the agents, or if you've done any customizations there.
Very interesting journey. We have built our own agent dashboard using the out-of-box CCP. We are at the point in time in which we are actively exploring the ability to use some work that ServiceNow has done just recently on developing their own connector with Connect. As well as taking advantage of those real-time APIs I talked about before. So there's a lot of very interesting things happening right now that will kind of help direct us going forward. Now, our agent desktop displays all the information we've captured up front. It does a screen pop into ServiceNow today, so we have that agent automation already in place. What we're looking to do is kind of keep it that real-time coaching. Some of the demos, Yasser has a demo thing today, even in another session earlier today, where he was showing real-time transcription, real-time translation, and keyword analysis. And then the next step beyond that is, can you use that technology plus some other things that are coming out to agent assist, next best action, what is the correct article to follow? And that's where I think it's most exciting from an agent automation and efficiency perspective. We can carve off minutes off handle time. That's huge, right? And we are just like this close to getting there. It's just over the horizon.
Behind you. Oh, next to you. One or the other.
So having worked with product myself and having worked with like more traditional, contact center platforms, I mean, one of the things that I've had to explain to stakeholders is how some of the concepts that they're used to working, especially if they've been working with Avaya, for example, and it's like, hey, Avaya does this. It's like, well, it doesn't work quite that way, but we can do something that gets you something similar. Right. Have you had to deal with cases where you've had to kind of explain to stakeholders a new, better way of doing things, and what experience do you have with kind of bridging those gaps?
So I will tell you that in our space, organizational change management is a pretty big item on the project plans. Now, obviously, they're their agents, but I don't let them do anything without thinking about organizational change management. So from that perspective, right, the agents we made sure we were pretty well prepped for them, knowing what it was going to look like, made them log in ahead of time so they saw it and all of that. So they're the biggest ones that will give you at go live, this doesn't work the way it used to work. Stakeholder-wise, the good news is for us, for this particular project, it was just us, right? It was our end user services team and the Atos desk locations. We are trying to share our experiences with some of the actual J&J consumer call centers. I think they're in the space where you're describing. We don't quite have them there yet. They're definitely impressed. I'm not sure they're ready to make the leap because they're nervous. So we're continuing to meet with them and just continuing to tell our story and show them that the impact of doing it this way and now doing it that way is not a big hurdle.
But I think one of the interesting thing is we haven't come across too many things we haven't been able to figure out, right? There's some hardcore engineering sometimes you have to do, but we don't think we've said no too many times, right? So there's a lot of, Another way of thinking about it, which I say, is it's almost a code-based contact center versus a traditional infrastructure-based contact center. And as such, if you can figure out how to do it in Lambda with external data sources and dipping into those data sources, you can do almost anything.
This is great. I just wanted to say thank you. This is really cool to see IT and back office leading front of house. And I'd be really interested in knowing if you've done a cost exercise to show how you were able to shift traditional CapEx funds into an operational expense model that's variable based on consumption.
We could probably talk to you offline about that, but as we mentioned kind of at the front, we didn't necessarily do this to save money, right? That wasn't our primary intention. We wanted to delight our end users. We wanted to get out of the traditional tropes that you get stuck in with traditional contact centers, the lengthy delays in making changes and the inflexibility. We wanted all of that before anything else.
But the money I'm not spending on change requests are going right into our continuous enhancements, right? Because we're not spending all that money on voice actors. So that's, for us, that's really where our bigger savings are, because we want to get to the enhancements and the capabilities that we weren't able to achieve with our previous system. Bless you.
Yep.
So for us, it's taking that change request money and just being able to continuously improve with it and put our roadmap out there.
And I don't think we really mentioned it early on, or I failed to mention it, that one component that's core to Connect but wasn't on those diagrams was AWS Poly. That's actually the core technology that we're using to feed in the SSML prompts, which is the language for pronunciation, into the text-to-speech, right? And that's how we made everything dynamic. Any other questions? All right, well, thank you very much for your time, guys.
You gotta hit it to the survey.
Yep.